Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Kiana Canada Show. I'm your host, Kiana Canada, and today we are going to be going over some of those debates that Cenk Uygur did recently over the last couple of weeks. That is right. We are going to be going over 3 critical debates that Cenk Uygur had. And I'm asking a very important question as to whether Cenk Uygur is forfeiting the political match for progressive rights and just in general, the progressive movement. And so, if you have been following some of the updates that I posted, basically what I'm going to be trying to do with my videos is kind of tie each issue that I discuss to a human rights issue, because I feel that that is very important for me to do as a student that is studying international human rights law. So that is going to be incorporated within this video. And so before we get into that discussion, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and you can also subscribe to this channel. You can also follow me on Facebook. My Facebook account is linked in the description of this YouTube channel. You can follow me on Substack. I just created a new Substack channel as well, or as a Substack account, for lack of better words. I created a Substack account, and you can also read some of the things that I post there. Basically, what I'm posting on my Substack is just really political statements that has to do with international human rights issues. So if you're ever interested in that, you can go ahead and go to that Substack and read those political statements. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into today's topic. Is Cenk Uygur abandoning the progressive movement, or is he forfeiting the political match for progressives? That is the question. Now, as I actually evaluate the arguments that Cenk Uygur had on 3 key debates, so basically he went on three platforms and held 3 debates. And so what I want to do is kind of make those behaviors, of course, this is in a political context. I want to make those visible for contemplation. I think it's important for us to really contemplate on those attitudes that Cenk Uygur has, and not only Cenk Uygur, but also the attitudes that his, I guess some of those platforms have, such as he went on Marc Lamont Hill's platform. Cenk Uygur also went on Brian Tyler Cohen's platform, and he also went on the Turning Point USA platform. Okay, so let's get into this. So the first one that I'm going to be covering is Cenk Uygur's commentary, more so his positions on the Turning Point USA platform. And so what I'm going to be doing, ladies and gentlemen, so it's important to understand that when I'm covering each of these debates, I'm not going to actually go into all the arguments that are present on each debate. Oh, but before I actually get into those arguments, you're going to actually hear some disturbances with the microphone. And ladies and gentlemen, there's nothing wrong with this microphone. This microphone is fine. This microphone is nearly brand new. There's nothing wrong with this microphone. So the disturbances is actually the far right getting into this, hacking into this particular account and trying to stop me from my commentary, but I will continue the commentary. So as we continue to talk about what's important, we are not going to be dissuaded in our arguments, and we're not going to be dissuaded with this particular show. So let's go ahead and get into it. So with the Turning Point USA, Cenk Uygur, one of the most important things that I think that Cenk Uygur raised was that it was important for not only the left, but also the right to denounce the establishment. And so I think what Cenk Uygur believes, ladies and gentlemen, is that I think he believes that the right has denounced the establishment. So in that debate with Turning Point USA, Cenk Uygur states that there were a number of political figures on the right that were denounced and were so Cenk Uygur believes that the right has denounced a number of establishment Republicans, and so his reasoning for that, or reasoning for this denouncing the establishment, is I think that Cenk is saying, hey, look, the right has denounced the establishment, and so the left, you should also denounce the establishment too. Now, there is a problem, ladies and gentlemen, that I have with this particular debate that Cenk Uygur um, held on the TYT podcast. And excuse me, not the TYT podcast, but this debate that Cenk Uygur held with Turning Point USA, is that I believe that Cenk Uygur had the right conversation, but he just had the right conversation, ladies and gentlemen, with the wrong people. So as I watched that debate that Cenk Uygur had with Turning Point USA, most of the arguments that Cenk Uygur was presenting to Turning Point USA were progressive arguments and populist positions. Now, this is a very wrong, okay, I won't say wrong. I believe that I think in a sense that Cenk Uygur, what his motive was to try and get the right comfortable with some of the populist positions. And I think his reasoning for doing so is to show them, hey, you are already taking a populist position. And so because you're taking this populist position, then let me rephrase that. So basically, some of the positions that Cenk believes that the right is taking are populist, yet the right is not defining those positions as populist. They're defining them as right-wing positions. And Cenk is, I guess, going in there to clear the air to say, no, these are not right-wing positions. They're actually populist positions, and they're positions that people like me, people like I agree with. I think that that is what Cenk is saying, that he agrees with those populist positions. And actually, when we peel back the layers of some of the positions that the right possibly has taken, that those positions, ladies and gentlemen, are populist positions. And so they're not calling them populist, but Cenk is saying, hey, these are populist positions. They're very popular with the right. And so is it possible to meet in the middle here? And so I think that that is very admirable that Cenk Uygur has done that. There is a very interesting debate to be had there. But what I also think, ladies and gentlemen, is that Cenk Uygur, what he was doing was having a populist discussion with the right wing. And as we know, the right wing, they don't want any left wing politicians in office. So that discussion that Cenk Uygur is having, ladies and gentlemen, with the right is likely falling on deaf ears. Now, why do I say that? The reason why I say that, ladies and gentlemen, is because during that debate that Cenk Uygur had with Turning Point USA, most of his positions, most of the things that he was discussing, most of those things that Cenk Uygur was discussing was not being accepted by the right. And because those positions were not being accepted by the right, I hold the position that Cenk was having the wrong conversation. Excuse me, he was having the right conversation. Cenk Uygur was having the right conversation, ladies and gentlemen. He was just having the right conversation with the wrong people. Now, I will agree with Cenk Uygur in one aspect. Now, Cenk Uygur says that when you are having discussions with the right, sometimes you can actually have these discussions with the right, and sometimes the right are welcoming. Whereas he argues that if you're having discussions with the left are not so welcoming. And so I can kind of see that, and the reason why I can kind of the reason, ladies and gentlemen, as to why, sorry, remember, let's see. So the reason why I can really agree with Cenk Uygur there is because the same thing happened to me. Like, I had some difficult discussions with some people on the right when I was in the Republic of Ireland. And after I had those difficult discussions, I was canceled by a lot of the left wing organizations and activists, both in the Republic of Ireland and in Belfast. Now, if you have been following my activism, you know that I am always going to have very left wing views. Some things I fall on the center. My views may fall in the center, and that's not very many. But I think that where my views tend to fall in the center when it comes to whether or not somebody's rights are being protected. So, for example, if it comes to women's rights and their rights are being violated, my view may fall, keep on the left. If it comes to, I guess, an issue where I'm trying to think of where like I really fall in the center. I think when it comes to like a political, not political ideology, but when it comes to no, I think I've got myself in a bunch here. Let's see. Where do I fall in the center? And maybe I don't. I tend to think that perhaps some of the things that I believe may fall into the center, but now, like, I'm trying to think of all the things that I'm you know thinking about and ruminating over, and there's not much that I fall into the center. Um, we'll have a discussion on that another time about whether or not some of my beliefs fall into the center. But for a period of time, I thought, you know what, I believe like this can be centered, this issue can be centered, that issue can be centered. And over time, like my beliefs actually shifted back to the left, because I guess that's where really my truest self is, the core of like what I believe is on the left. And so some of those centrist positions that I've taken, perhaps in the past, actually shifted back to the left, because as I began to really explore those issues and look deeper into them, I realized all along that really that was a false position that I held, and that to be authentic to myself, that the position that was very important for me to really hold was, continuing with that leftist position. So, um, let's see. And to go back to this discussion with Cenk Uygur and Turning Point USA. So Cenk Uygur, one thing that he did was he brought up constitutional rights for trans people. But Cenk Uygur received a lot of consternation from the crowd, the Turning Point USA crowd, when he brought up those constitutional issues. So I think that what Cenk Uygur is attempting to do, ladies and gentlemen, by having these debates is with platforms like Turning Point USA, is that Cenk Uygur is trying to, in the words of Sabrina Salvati, is to try to meet people where they are. Now, is that possible? Can you do that? Is the question. And that's not a question that I'm going to answer in this specific video that is actually a question for you to ponder on and for you to answer yourself. And so I want to move on to the second debate that Cenk Uygur had, and he had a debate with Brian Tyler Cohen. Now, in the headline of that video, that Brian Tyler Cohen's video, is that Cenk Uygur and Brian Tyler Cohen spar over A, B, and C. And I don't really think that that was the case. I don't think they sparred at all in that video. I think that there was just some points that they brought up, discussions that they had. And so Cenk Uygur in that particular video argued, ladies and gentlemen, that MAGA 2024 is not the same base as MAGA 2016. Now, I really disagree with this point, and the reason why I disagree with this point is that one need only, ladies and gentlemen, point to Mondale Robinson's testimony, where he specifically stated that he was being harassed and intimidated by far-right persons, and that they were actually hacking into his account, doing so unlawfully, and really intimidating Mondale Robinson and his family. Now, Mondale Robinson spoke in the present, so this wasn't something that happened it didn't happen in 2016. This was something that was happening in 2024. So I would argue that, yes, ladies and gentlemen, the MAGA that we had seen in 2016 is the same MAGA that we see in 2024. Another argument to support that position is that if the MAGA 2024 is not the same MAGA that we see in 2016, then why does most of MAGA want Trump to pardon the MAGA that we've seen in 2016? If this is a newfound MAGA, if this is a new movement, why are 2024 MAGA asking for 2016 MAGA to be pardoned is the question. And so that is not to argue. So to counter argue that what I'm not arguing is that every person in MAGA engages in cybercrime. That's not the argument that I'm making. But what we really need to pay attention to is that when Mondale Robinson was going through this this specific period of cybercrime and far-right individuals hacking into his accounts unlawfully, no person who identified as MAGA, no person who was part of this MAGA movement denounced that. So it really raises an important question as to whether MAGA 2024 is markedly different from MAGA 2016. And my argument would be no, they're not different, that they are the same. Now, Brian Tyler Cohen points out that Cenk Uygur has been more critical of the left more than the right has been critical of the Republican Party. And I would agree with that, ladies and gentlemen. So Cenk Uygur, when he went on Turning Point USA, he wasn't really critical at all of the left. He wasn't really critical at all of the right. Now, Cenk Uygur, to Cenk Uygur's credit, Cenk Uygur does state that the reason for that is that he had a discussion. Just a moment. So Cenk Uygur argues, ladies and gentlemen, that he had a debate with the Turning Point USA, but they didn't get into a fight. And you know what? That position is admirable. Now, I am of the position that you can actually sit across from people and have really difficult discussions with people that you disagree with. I try and do it all the time. It's quite difficult to do. It's really quite difficult to do in many respects because, ladies and gentlemen, most people don't want to have those difficult discussions. But I think it's really important for us to have those difficult discussions. And so I want to move on to say that, let's see. So Cenk Uygur continues, and Cenk argues that we should not take, that politicians should not take a maximal position on social issues because doing so loses elections, is what Cenk Uygur argues. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I disagree with Cenk Uygur on that point. I don't think that Cenk Uygur is actually representing that point fairly, because we know that that is not true. Donald Trump took maximalist positions on a couple of issues. So, Donald Trump took a maximalist position on immigration, pledging to deport the largest number of undocumented immigrants. Trump also took a maximum position on policing. So Trump took a maximal position also, ladies and gentlemen, on policing because he pledged to indemnify all police officers when we already know that police officers have strong protections within the United States through the doctrine such as qualified immunity. So the argument that the left is taking a maximalist position is really just not really representing these concerns really fairly and really accurately, ladies and gentlemen. To reiterate, Donald Trump, the right, has taken maximalist positions on several issues. Just a moment. Okay, and so I want to go ahead and continue to have this debate, and so, or actually evaluate these particular issues that I believe is so important. So, okay. So, one thing that I agree with is that sometimes popular and necessary policies don't get passed because our leaders don't want to pass them. This was an argument made by Cenk Uygur. Cenk Uygur stated that, you know what, these issues, they're not getting passed because leaders don't want to pass them. I 100% agree with that. Sometimes when we have policies and they're popular, they are not getting passed. And one example of that is that one thing that is very popular on both sides is, increasing the minimum wage for all groups. That's very popular. And so, although that is a very popular position, ladies and gentlemen, what is happening is that the left, the politicians on the right and the left, they don't want to actually pass that position, even though they're popular. Okay, let's see. Let's moving forward. What else was an important aspect of the Brian Tyler Cohen debate? Okay, so let's Okay, so Tyler Cohen argues that Democrats take a maximalist position so as to anchor down their their progressivism. And I 100% agree that sometimes you must take that position to really anchor down the issues that you truly believe in. I think that that's an important thing to do. When you take a maximalist position to anchor down a ideology or a belief, I think that people tend to, in certain respects, in certain instances, that people tend to really trust you more and to appreciate what you are talking about a little more than when you don't take a position like that. So, ladies and gentlemen, Cenk Uygur, he also pushes back by stating that the left screams, "How dare you?" And you right wingers, and calling the rights racist, right? And Cenk is saying that none of that is very helpful. He believes that like doing that and making, arguing, making those arguments aren't really helpful. But, ladies and gentlemen, I would argue that if you have a specific position that you feel is important to take, then you should take that position. It doesn't matter whether or not a person believes you or thinks that that position is very harmful or helpful. Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. We're having mic issues, so I'm going to go ahead and try and fix those issues. So if you can bear with me just one moment. So the show must go on regardless of whether this is happening. So Cenk also stated that you're hurting trans people, that is not important, that we shouldn't be saying that. But ladies and gentlemen, I would argue that if trans people are being harmed, that we should state that trans people are being harmed. Cenk Uygur also argued it's we're not supposed to say that Black people are being harmed. So Cenk Uygur says if we argue that Black bodies are being harmed, we're not supposed to even say that. But I would argue, ladies and gentlemen, that we are. We're supposed to say that Black bodies are being harmed. If Black bodies are being harmed. Now, Cenk Uygur, he argues that this is an extreme position to take, ladies and gentlemen, but I disagree. I disagree that it's really an extreme position to take. I think that this is really a balanced position to take. If Black bodies are being harmed, then we are supposed to talk about it. And so, do I disagree with Cenk Uygur? Absolutely. I absolutely disagree with his position. Now, let's continue to move forward. Let's see. And so Cenk Uygur said, none of that is helpful. So if you call somebody, if you label them a racist or if you label them a white supremacist, that none of that is really helpful at all. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I would disagree with that position because in a video, Cenk Uygur, so in his discussion with Rabbi Shmuley on the Piers Morgan debate that he had, and I think it was something with Israel and Gaza. Cenk Uygur actually used some of those invectives, and so Cenk Uygur called, I believe, Rabbi Shmuley some of those invectives. And so I think that Cenk Uygur was being hypocritical there in his arguments, which in my personal opinion, I don't think was helpful at all. So as I was saying, Cenk Uygur, and ladies and gentlemen, I really want to apologize for the issues with the mic. I want to reiterate that there is really nothing wrong with this mic. This mic is a brand new mic. And if you have been following my story, you understand that I am actually dealing with cyber hackers that are also getting into these videos and also, you know, getting into these videos and messing with the things that are actually the microphones, to be specific. But we must go on. So any any issue that we are dealing with in this video, such as errors or issues with the microphone, we are going to be contributing that and, attributing that to the state agents and the non-state agents who are actually engaging in this behavior. But I want to go ahead and go back to some of the arguments that I made, just to kind of, because there was a lot of issues with the mic. Um, so let's see, where was I? So, okay, so Cenk Uygur argues that politicians should not take a maximal position on social issues because doing so loses elections. But, ladies and gentlemen, I would disagree with this position that Cenk Uygur has actually argued for, because specifically, ladies and gentlemen, that Trump did take a maximal position on immigration. What he did was he pledged to deport the largest number of undocumented immigrants. We know that to be true. We also know that Trump took a maximal position on policing, because what Trump did was he pledged to indemnify all police officers. And when we already know, ladies and gentlemen, that police officers have strong protections already through the doctrine such as qualified immunity. Now, what I agree with, ladies and gentlemen, is that sometimes popular and necessary policies don't get passed because our leaders, they don't want to pass them. And this is what Cenk Uygur has argued. And I agree with Cenk Uygur there. Like, sometimes a position is not going to get passed because the leaders don't want to pass it. An example of this is to raise the minimum wage for the working class. We all agree that the minimum wage for we all agree, ladies and gentlemen, that the minimum wage for people like you and I, or just so that's the ordinary people, that's the working class, that should be lifted to $15 an hour. That the time is changing and things are more expensive now. So some have argued that the minimum wage should be raised actually like to $21 an hour. But I think that in some US states, the minimum wage, you can see it's as low as like $5.25 an hour. And so I agree with Cenk Uygur there. And so in that debate with Brian Tyler Cohen, Cohen argues that, well, Democrats, they take a maximalist position so as to anchor down their progressivism. And ladies and gentlemen, I agree with that. Sometimes you have to take a maximalist position to really anchor down your belief system. But yet, Cenk Uygur, he pushes back and he says, it's not helpful if one screams, "How dare you, you right wingers." He says, it's not helpful if one is calling someone a racist. He's saying it's not helpful if one is saying that you're hurting trans people. Cenk Uygur is saying it's not helpful that to say that we're hurting Black bodies. And all of this, I disagree with Cenk Uygur. It is helpful if there is a particular policy position that is harming trans people. Cenk Uygur, I believe he is wrong there. I believe that Black people, if there is a policy that is harming Black bodies, then you should definitively say that that policy position is harming Black bodies. So, yes, I am in disagreement with Cenk Uygur, and I am in the affirmative that if there is a policy position that is harming the welfare of trans people, that policy position should be stated. I also take the position that if there is a policy position then that is harming Black bodies, and it is genuinely doing so, which I don't think that Black Americans are. making up the fact that certain policy positions are harming Black bodies. So I am of the opinion that we should, yes, ladies and gentlemen, we should state that these specific policy positions are harming Black bodies. Now, Cenk said that none of that is helpful. And ladies and gentlemen, I think that Cenk Uygur is inconsistent in this specific position because in his debate with Rabbi Shmuley on the Piers Morgan show, Cenk used some of those same, uh, of course, saying that a policy position is harming trans people or saying that a policy position is harming Black bodies is not um, a slur. But Cenk Uygur has used some invectives against Rabbi Shmuley on uh, the Piers Morgan show. So is Cenk Uygur, is he calling, because Cenk Uygur is saying if you say that a particular policy position is harming trans bodies, if you say that a particular policy position is harming Black bodies, then that is an extreme statement. But is Cenk Uygur also being extreme by stating the things that he stated in his interview with Rabbi Shmuley? I mean, he did have a debate with Rabbi Shmuley, and he's said some of those invectives, calling someone, more specifically, he called Rabbi Shmuley a racist. So is Shame Uygur, excuse me, is Cenk Uygur, was he being extreme when he said that? Is the question, or did he really mean it? And so moving forward, I think it's easy for Cenk Uygur to hold the positions that he holds on trans issues because Cenk Uygur, ladies and gentlemen, obviously so, and by the arguments that he makes and through his pronouns and his history, Cenk Uygur is obviously not a trans person. So it's quite easy for Cenk Uygur to say that trans people shouldn't uh, try and protect themselves, or to say that certain policy positions are not harming trans people, because Cenk Uygur is not trans, and Cenk Uygur doesn't have to deal with those policies that are harming trans people. And I also think that it's easy for Cenk Uygur to hold his position on Black issues because Cenk Uygur, his demographic is really not a demographic that is disproportionately incarcerated. His demographic is not a demographic that is extrajudicially executed in the United States. So it's easy for Cenk Uygur to say it's not helpful to uh, it's easy for Cenk Uygur to argue that we shouldn't be saying that a certain policy position harms Black bodies. It's easy for Cenk Uygur to say that because Cenk Uygur is not trans. Cenk Uygur is not uh, a Black person. So, to wrap this up, yes, it's easy for Cenk Uygur to hold those positions because Cenk Uygur, in essence, ladies and gentlemen, is not affected by anything that happens to these two groups. And so that kind of wraps up that debate that Cenk Uygur had with Brian Tyler Cohen. Those are some of the points that uh, that I uh, that I really wanted to make some that I really wanted to provide commentary on. And lastly, Cenk Uygur had a debate with Marc Lamont Hill. Now, of these three debates, I think that this was Cenk Uygur's strongest debate. Now, I've watched Cenk Uygur have uh, several debates on, over the years. Like I was a follower of TYT, I think, when they first started out. And I watched Cenk Uygur in multiple debates, such as his debates on the Piers Morgan show and other shows. And I think that Cenk Uygur is starting to finally, uh, hold a very logical and rational debate with others instead of getting angry and yelling and screaming. Now, I don't know what changed Shank. What made him evolve. Maybe it was his debate with Candace Owens. As you know, Cenk Uygur appeared on Piers Morgan with Candace Owens. And in that debate, Cenk Uygur was yelling and screaming, and Candace Owens told Cenk Uygur that he has to learn to control his anger, that he has to be able to debate without getting angry. And so I think that possibly Cenk Uygur actually took that under advisement and started to work on the way in which he debates political issues. And I must say that Cenk Uygur actually conducted himself very well in the debate with Marc Lamont Hill. As for Marc Lamont Hill, I believe that Marc Lamont Hill had some very strong journalistic questions in this particular debate. He raised some very strong questions. Like, I have watched Marc Lamont Hill actually have debates as well. Just kind of over the last couple of years, I've watched Marc Lamont Hill engage in debates. And I think that in this particular debate that Marc Lamont Hill, now I'm not saying in others he hasn't, some argue that Marc Lamont Hill is a very strong debater. But what I believe is that Marc Lamont Hill, his positions, I believe that not necessarily the strongest in debating, although he is a good debater. I don't think that he is maximally strong in debating. But I do think that the edge that Marc Lamont Hill has over, that kind of outshines his debating skills is the way in which he asks questions. Marc Lamont Hill asks some very thought-provoking questions. And so in this particular debate that he had with Cenk Uygur, he has some really good questions. He's a really good journalist. And so getting into this particular debate, let's see. So Cenk Uygur states that approximately 15% of MAGA, which he calls the lost tribe of the populist movement, have good intent. So basically, Cenk Uygur acknowledges that this is kind of like a loose figure. This is, not based on any statistical data, but, in his estimate, he feels that only 15% of MAGA have good intent. And he further states that 50% of MAGA, which Marc Lamont Hill knows, not necessarily known to Cenk, but only known to Marc Lamont Hill, may be the Trump cult supporters. Or basically what he's saying is that this 50%, which he states that is known only to Marc Lamont Hill, is known as a Trump cult, Trump supporters, the Trump cult, the cult in which makes up white nationalist people. Now, if you go to that debate, you will see that Cenk Uygur, he doesn't actually include himself in this as knowing that this 50% makes up what is known as the Trump cult or a white nationalist movement. Cenk Uygur doesn't say that at all. Cenk Uygur only states, ladies and gentlemen, that this is what is known to Marc Lamont Hill. So basically, he is putting that on Marc Lamont Hill to say, this is what you believe. It's not what I believe, it's what you believe. And so I think that Cenk, in that particular segment of that debate, Cenk Uygur is taking a definitive stance. Now, Cenk Uygur, in that debate with Marc Lamont Hill, he also believes that 35% to 40% of MAGA does not have a white supremacist agenda. Now, this is in Cenk Uygur's view, which he states because he has interacted with this percentage. So Cenk Uygur believes that this percentage doesn't fall into this particular ideology because he has interacted with 35 to 40%. And I really don't have a argument for that because, of course, I am not in Cenk Uygur's shoes, and I haven't interacted with the same people that Cenk Uygur interacted at a particular given time. So if Cenk Uygur argues that 35 to 40% of MAGA in which he has interacted with, the 35 to 40% to which Cenk has interacted with, is not doesn't have a white nationalist ideology, then I will take him at his word until proven otherwise. But I think that Marc Lamont Hill had a very strong argument, which think that he points out in the debate with Cenk Uygur, is that if America decided to get rid of the legacy media, MAGA would be comfortable keeping Fox News, even though it is legacy media as well. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that Cenk had an answer for that. And that is very true. Now, Cenk Uygur, his whole purpose of going on to Turning Point USA was to introduce, in my personal opinion, one can infer, is to introduce populist views to the right wing voters or the right wing crowd, right? And so Cenk Uygur comes back and says, hey, they're against the establishment and they're against legacy media. But in line with what Marc Lamont Hill states is that, okay, let's say that we did do away with legacy media. If we did away with MSNBC, we did away with CBS News, did away with CNN. Those on the right, ladies and gentlemen, those on the right would still want Fox News, is because that's the channel that the right watches. Now, we, ladies and gentlemen, we watch, of course, some independent media. We watch, like me, for example, I watch CNN, I watch MSNBC, I watch CBS News, I watch NBC News. I don't ever watch Fox News. It's very rare that I do watch Fox News. But I think that if we all decided, hey, we don't want any news, we don't want any legacy media, it would be the right stating that they want to keep Fox News. So Marc Lamont Hill, he made, that was a very strong point that Marc Lamont Hill raised in his debate with Cenk Uygur. And let's see. Now, another strong point that Marc Lamont Hill raised in his debate with Cenk Uygur, which I 100% agree with, is he said that if you are a white supremacist, then the MAGA movement is your tribe. Now, I also agree with Marc Lamont Hill that not every white person is a white supremacist, but nearly all white supremacists are in the MAGA room. I 100% with Marc Lamont Hill there. That was another strong point in that debate in which Cenk Uygur really couldn't come back from. Cenk Uygur didn't really have a very strong position or a strong counter argument to that. But Cenk Uygur, he states that he does not believe that Charlie Kirk is a white supremacist. And he says that he gives a number of reasons for that. And ladies and gentlemen, I have to be honest with you. I'm really light on the biography of Charlie Kirk. I don't actually watch any of his debates. I don't. I don't watch Turning Point USA. I don't listen to any arguments that that Charlie Kirk makes, and it's not because I'm closed-minded. It's just that he's really not. Uh, I don't believe that Charlie Kirk is open-minded enough for me to actually give him my time and my attention. Now, Charlie Kirk is very wealthy and has a lot of followers, and uh, I'm pretty sure it doesn't mean anything for little old me to really not really give him my time and attention. So, that's neither here nor there. But I think if we consider the gradations of white supremacy, I think that Kirk would likely fall into that category of alt right or far right. And this is because I don't really know all of the policies or the positions that Charlie Kirk advocates for. Again, I don't really listen to any of his content. And so, just based on some of the things that I've watched in reference to Charlie Kirk recently, and some of the tweets that I've seen just kind of coming across my feed in the past, I would say that Charlie Kirk may fall into the far right and not necessarily a white supremacist. Now, if you disagree with me, then if you show me any evidence, then I am likely to change my mind. I am an open-minded person, and we could agree that not everyone is a white supremacist, but we can agree that there are some people who are. So, for example, we understand that Nick Fuentes, he has, you know, proudly claimed to be a white supremacist, among others. And so I don't know if Charlie Kirk has, and really to reiterate, I haven't listened to a lot of his uh, political positions or watched Turning Point USA to really try and find that out. Now, I want to move forward and say that, this was a very interesting debate with Marc Lamont Hill, because again, I think that Mark took Cenk Uygur to task, and that he you could actually see his journalist side in this debate. Like, he asked some really strong questions, and to Schenk's credit, he actually held his position as well. Like, he was very calm and collected during that debate. Um, so when we're talking about white supremacy in the United States, and in the context of this specific video, Cenk Uygur, he argues that by labeling specific people white supremacist, what we're doing is we're presuming that they hold a system, that they're upholding a system that perpetuates white supremacy. And he further argues that this is wrong, given that all Americans perpetuate white supremacy. Now, in that particular segment, I watched that, and that is how I interpreted what he said. Now, if anyone thinks that I'm wrong about that interpretation, please contact me and let me know. But I would disagree with Schenk. I don't think that all Americans perpetuate or propagate or perpetrate the three P's, white supremacy. Only, uh, you know, for example, like, I can't do that. Like, I can't tell anybody where to live. I can't tell anybody where to eat, where to sleep. I can't stop anyone from going to the court and see those who are going to court and wanting to seek redress. I can't stop them from doing that. I can't stop anyone from getting a job. I can't do any of these things. I don't have that power. I don't have the power of white supremacy. So for Cenk Uygur to say that everyone in America is perpetuating, so putting into circulation white supremacy, I think is just a very flawed position and argument that he raised in that debate. Let's see, what else was very important. Now, I disagree with Marc Lamont Hill on one aspect in this particular debate. So, Marc Lamont Hill argues that Schenck may have advanced white right wing interests by going on America First. But I disagree with that position. I don't think that Schenck actually at all advanced right wing interest. When I watched, so when I watched and evaluated that debate with Turning Point USA, I didn't take from it that Schenck Uygur was trying to advance right wing interest, even if he were trying to do that. I think that that debate actually was more about Cenk Uygur trying to advance populist positions on a right wing platform. And whether or not that was effective remains to be seen. But I don't think, I disagree that we can't have discussions with people that we disagree with. You know, in the Republic of Ireland, I had a discussion with Derek Bly, who is on the far right, and I disagree with, most, probably 99.9% of his political positions. And I think that this was one of Marc Lamont Hill's weakest arguments because he actually went on. We're back. Let's see. Where was I? Okay. So, what I was saying, ladies and gentlemen, is that actually really, so Cenk Uygur was arguing that by labeling specific people white supremacist, that presumes that they uphold a system that perpetuates white supremacy. And he further argues that this is wrong, that given that all Americans, like, so so his argument is that, most Americans, perpetuate white supremacy. And I disagree because, ladies and gentlemen, I can't tell a person where they can eat and sleep. I can't tell people where, what high school that they can go to. I can't tell people um, what house to live in. I can't tell people like where to get educated if they are allowed to get educated. I don't have the power to do any of this. I can't tell people if, I can't stop people from going to court and getting a legal remedy. I can't stop people from just really, ladies and gentlemen, at all, uh, being able to exercise their rights. So I disagree with Cenk Uygur there. Um, what I agree with Cenk Uygur is that Shank's, Shank actually tried to advance, to reiterate, what he tried to do was advance populist issues on the America First stage. And I think that that is admirable. I agree with Cenk Uygur there, but I agree that, it's okay to try and sit across from people that we disagree with. For example, I disagree with a lot of the things that the right says. For example, I engaged in a conversation with Derek Bly, who is on the right. I disagree with 99.9% of what Derek Bly says and the things that he believes in. But I was willing to have a conversation with Derek Bly because I think it's important that we open ourselves up to people that we disagree with and trying to understand, uh, people that are different from us and seeing if we can find common ground on political issues. And so I've seen a lot of debates that Marc Lamont Hill has actually engaged in. And he also is on stages with people that he disagrees with, so I think it's okay. Um, but before I say this, I don't think that Marc Lamont Hill is saying that we shouldn't be on stages with people that we disagree with. I just think that Marc Lamont Hill is what Marc Lamont Hill, what his position is that we shouldn't be on a stage with people that we disagree with and not support or defend our position, the positions that we find most authentic to us. And so that's what I think that Marc Lamont Hill was getting at there in his debate with Cenk Uygur is he felt that Cenk Uygur was not really defending the populist or the leftist uh, positions with Turning Point USA. I think that to reiterate, I think that Cenk Uygur was trying to make Turning Point, excuse me, he was trying to make, I believe that Cenk Uygur was trying to make the audience, the Turning Point audience, comfortable with those leftist ideas and to try and introduce to them or to try to uh, highlight that those positions in which they already support are populist, and left wingers agree with that as well. I think that's what he was trying to do. Whether or not that is successful remains to be seen. Um, it's interesting though. It's very interesting. Let's see. Now, I want to go back to a statement that Schenck makes a couple, he makes this statement a few times in his debate with Marc Lamont Hill, and he is stating that he Cenk Uygur believes that the left, excuse me, not the left, he believes that the right is more welcoming than the left. But I would argue that when it comes to the left and it comes to the right, and ladies and gentlemen, remember at the beginning of this video, I was talking about how some of my views are centrist. I think that this is one of them. I believe that on the left and the right, that both can be unwelcoming. I think that the right has an easier time and is more skilled at hiding who they, excuse me, I mean the left. So the left has a easier way and is possibly more skilled at hiding who they dislike. Now, this is probably the establishment, but when we go into far leftists, at the far end, we know that it's going to be very difficult to have a conversation with them if there is a position that they support and that you don't support. It's the same thing on the right. With the right, if there is something that with the establishment, they have an easier time. They're more skillful in hiding things that they dislike about the left. Yet, if you go far, far right into that territory, you're moving, swiftly across that gradation, you can kind of see, ladies and gentlemen, that those on the far right, it may be difficult to have a conversation with them. It would probably be a difficult time to have a conversation with them about trans issues. We know that it's difficult to have a conversation with them about critical race theory. They are not open to that. They're trying to ban that in schools, and some states have already banned that. So you can kind of see that that is not necessarily true. When Schenck is saying that the right is more welcoming, that is untrue. It's about the same on both sides. The farther that you get on both sides, the more unwelcoming it gets on both sides. Now, the right, it may be easier to engage in some political discussions with them. It seems like the right likes to debate more. That's not to say everyone in the right likes to debate more, and that nobody on the left does not like to debate. We've seen a lot of people do that. We've seen Brian Tyler Cohen do that as well, and Marc Lamont Hill. But I don't think that just because, you are able to have discussions with people on the right, that means that they are more welcoming. Now, what else did I find very important by watching that debate? Let's see. Which let's see. Okay. Well, so, just kind of like evaluating just that entire debate. Like, I can't find anything that I really found was was useful or something that stood out to me in that particular debate. Now, of the three debates, I think that Schenck really held himself well in the debate with Marc Lamont Hill. I think that Cenk Uygur is really more at home with right wing media. I think that Schenck is probably, my prediction is Schenck is probably going to move further and further to the right. I think that Schenck is over probably the next year or so going to abandon the populist movement, that he might even abandon the progressive movement and move uh, toward the right. Just and that's just my prediction. That could be wrong, but that's the prediction I'm making in this video. And the reason why I predict that is because out of those three debates that I watched, Cenk Uygur seemed more comfortable in the uh, on the stage with Charlie Kirk, which makes me feel like that's probably where he's more at home at. Uh, I think that in his debate with Brian Tyler Cohen, that that was where he was least likely to perform well because he's going against, uh, you know, someone who is really a leftist. We understand that Brian Tyler Cohen has interviewed Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. He is, well in support of, well in support of Joe Biden and the Kamala Harrises and the Joe Bidens. And so he is a very skilled communicator and debater as well. I think he has, I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that once before he has actually had a communications position with one of these campaigns. And so, he knows a lot of the talking points of the right and is able to really uh, add or offer a counter argument to those talking points on the right. And so I would argue, ladies and gentlemen, that the debate uh, that Cenk Uygur had with Brian Tyler Cohen was one of his weakest debates. His strongest debate was his debate with Marc Lamont Hill. I think that he was able to keep himself very composed in that debate. He was able to offer some really strong arguments in that debate, and he was able to reason well without getting angry, which we have seen Cenk Uygur do multiple times. I think his where Shank, to reiterate, I think where Shank is at home is on the stage with America First. He seemed more comfortable on that stage. He seemed more, his energy kind of merged with Turning Point USA. I would probably argue, just after watching this media tour that Cenk Uygur went on, I would argue that Cenk Uygur is probably going to move further to the right. um, so, as I would say one of the strongest, well, I won't say strongest, but I think what's admirable about Cenk Uygur in this media tour is that he is no longer a Lurican. So he's no longer a Lurican in debates anymore. He is, now composed. To reiterate, he's more composed now, and I think that is something to really acknowledge. And I think everyone did a phenomenal job. Uh, Brian Tyler Cohen, he didn't really take Cenk Uygur to task in his questioning. So again, as I stated, of course, in earlier in this podcast, that I don't think that Brian Tyler Cohen sparred with Cenk Uygur. Like, it was a very low stakes debate, to say the least. And I think that who challenged him the most was Marc Lamont Hill, who actually offered and really asked some really tough questions. Now, I have another prediction. I predict that Cenk Uygur is eyeing a communications position in the White House, possibly a communications position with the Trump administration, or possibly some level, maybe maybe if it's not a communications position, maybe it is a Senate position, or a House of Representatives position. So I predict that Cenk Uygur is likely probably going to be eyeing a House of Representatives position, a Senate position, or a communications position in the White House. Now, is Cenk moving to the right to get more policy wins for progressives? Is that what he is doing? Because that's what he says that he's doing, but I don't know if I quite buy that. I have to be more convinced. I don't think that Cenk is necessarily moving further to the right to get more policy wins for progressives. By stating that he is doing that, that is actually telling everyone his strategy, and we know that people really don't reveal their strategies. So I don't really think that Cenk Uygur is doing that. I do have a theory, and the theory is that what I think is that Cenk Uygur probably fears denaturalisation, in that maybe he fears that the Trump administration will come after those who are naturalized and who have been naturalized in the United States. And that I think that maybe if Trump comes after that group of people, then that his livelihood is in jeopardy, and of course he wants to remain in the country. That's a theory. Another theory that I have is Cenk Uygur, he does not like to lose. We know that. We watch a lot of his debates, and we watch a lot of his, his he's an anchor on the TYT News Network. And so just by watching him over the years, I do know that Cenk Uygur does not like to lose. And that could be a reason as to why Cenk Uygur is moving further to the right. It's just my theory. It's just my theory. And ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. That is, of course, my theory and my prediction. Now, this is my time to offer a human rights evaluation of these debates, and it is more so centering Cenk Uygur. And, the issue with the deportations that Donald Trump could perform. And so what I believe is that Cenk Uygur, he is now, and not that he hasn't done this before, but is more so, despite the disagreement on the left, Cenk Uygur is exercising his right to self-determination, freely determining his political status. Now, he's freely determining his political status, whether or not that is, not merging, but actually moving farther to the right. That is something that he is freely doing. Now, to reiterate, I think that the way in which he is trying to protect or to exercise his self-determination is that he is preserving his existence and his identity, having control over, in essence, his own affairs, because there is a possibility, that Donald Trump may, you know, it is quite possible that Donald Trump may, you know, group in everybody in this group of people that he is seeking to deport, and that could be naturalized citizens as well. Now, Javier Rahman states that the right to self-determination is of particular importance because its realization is an essential condition for the effective guarantee and observance of individual human rights and for the promotion in strengthening those rights. We can see this right in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's in Article 1, the right to self-determination. And I think that this is what Cenk Uygur is doing. He is exercising his right to self-determination. There is a possibility that the Trump administration may do a broad sweep of people that are in the United States. It's unpredictable, and maybe Cenk Uygur does not know whether or not this is going to affect naturalized citizens, and if this broad sweep of immigrants, you know, again, to reiterate, we don't know if Donald Trump is including those citizens under this umbrella of immigrants within the United States. And so we have seen before that under the Trump administration, as well as under other administrations as well, that people with particular statuses had been deported, even those who felt, some dreamers who have, there's policies and legislation that's supposed to be in place to protect them, to keep them, anchored in the United States. And some of those people have been deported under the Trump administration. So we don't know what's coming. Certainly, Cenk Uygur does not know what is coming. And so I think what he's doing right now is exercising his right to self-determination to protect himself, and looking out for himself. And that is, what one can do in a situation like this. Everybody is choosing a side, and I guess that now Cenk Uygur is doing the same thing. And to wrap this up, we don't actually know exactly how far this is going to go, how far right Cenk Uygur is going to move, but it's an interesting thing to observe over the next year, and that is probably what I'll be doing. So there you have it. I hope that this was an interesting evaluation. I'm your host, Kiana Canada. Don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends, and also you can subscribe to this channel. You can also follow me on Facebook. My Facebook account is linked in the body of this channel. You can also read some of my videos on Substack, some of my articles on Substack. And I was going to, take a break from making political videos until the new year, but this was something that was very interesting to discuss. So, I came out of hibernation to make this video. And so that's why I did it. But I want to know what you think. What do you think about Cenk moving to the right? What do you think about Cenk going on Turning Point USA? What are your opinions about that? How do you feel? Let me know, and I will review your answers. All right, ladies and gentlemen, have a good evening. Bye-bye.